Parents sided with my ex-husband and cut me off for years, but then they suddenly wanted to reconnect. When I refused, they showed up at my stepdaughter's school. Hi, I'm a bit torn and I'm hoping you all can help me figure this out. I 30 to FAM, struggling to figure out what to do. About my parents' 60s, they're trying to reconnect with me, but it's kind of complicated and I need help figuring out how to approach this whole thing. I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about them and my relationship with them. First, growing up, my parents were always hard on me. No matter what I did, it was never good enough. If I got an A, they wanted to know why it wasn't an A+. If I picked a hobby, they'd nitpick about how it wasn't useful enough. Their attitude wasn't outright abusive, but they always found a way to make me feel like I was failing somehow when I made big decisions. They'd act like I was incapable of thinking for myself, and they'd do everything they could to meddle with my life, and that's where things really blew up later on. When I was 23, I married my ex-husband Jake and I were high school sweethearts, so we figured we'd get married once we were done with college and it settled down a little. For the first time ever, my parents seemed to like my choice of a partner. In hindsight, I think they probably liked him because he came from a well-off family and seemed put together, but things took a turn for the worst for me after I got married to Jake. As soon as we got married, it was like a switch inside Jake got flipped and he became this horrible human being. He became extremely manipulative and controlling. He constantly criticized me, isolated me from friends, and had a very short temper. Things got so bad that I felt like I was walking on eggshells every single day. I know a lot of you are going to ask why I didn't leave him as soon as I saw his behavior start to change, but I want you to know that things weren't that easy for me. I barely had an understanding of what a good relationship looked like. Besides, I was very young and I thought that I was in love. I thought that Jake was going through a rough time and that he had no idea about how to deal with his own emotions, so he was taking it out on me. I know it sounds stupid, but I loved him. I tried my best to convince myself that I just needed to be there more for him, but after years of tolerating his nonsense, I realized I needed to leave him, and no amount of talking or yelling was going to change the way he treated me. It took a while to gather up all the necessary funds, but when I finally decided to escape, I went to my parents for help. I only went to them because I had been open and honest with them about what Jake was like. I started doing that a few months before I was planning to leave Jake because I figured that they'd help me out. Once again, in hindsight, I should have known that they would not have helped me out, because every time I told them about something Jake said or did, they would find ways to make me feel bad about it instead of supporting me or even just comforting me. So, when I ran to them for help, they got mad at me. They said I was being immature for throwing my marriage away and that I needed to stick it out because getting divorced was very shameful. I think that the worst thing they did to me during that time was tell Jake where I was staying. My plan was to stay with them for 2 weeks while I spoke to Jake about getting a divorce, because I knew that Jake would lose his mind and hurt me if I lived with him. I didn't want Jake to know where I was at all, and I figured that if he ever did find out where I was staying, having my parents around would at least stop him from hurting me in any way. But after staying with my parents for only 3 days, they ended up calling Jake to let him know that I was staying with them and that he could come over whenever he wanted so he could talk to me. They thought they were helping me reconcile, but they put me in serious danger. Thankfully, Jake didn't do anything more than just cry and beg me to go back, but after that I knew I couldn't count on my parents for anything. I left their house and ended up staying with a friend. I barely spoke to them much, but up until then, They still called me regularly to check in on me and to tell me how wrong I was for continuing with the divorce. It took a while, but once the divorce was finalized, I never heard from my parents again. I didn't get a single call or a text or even a holiday card from them. It was like I didn't exist. At first I was heartbroken. I spent months crying over the fact that my own parents had turned their backs on me, but eventually I realized I couldn't dwell on it forever, because I had much bigger fish to fry. I literally had to rebuild my life from scratch. The next few years were hard but life-changing. I moved to a new city and started therapy, which helped me heal from both Jake's abuse and my parents' abandonment. I worked my butt off to establish a career in graphic design, which was something I'd always been passionate about. Slowly but surely, things started to look up for me. About 2 years ago, I met Eric, 36 meters, who's now my husband. He's kind, supportive, and everything Jake wasn't. He has a 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, from a previous relationship, and we've built a beautiful little family together. We got married just a few months ago, and life finally feels stable and happy. And now, onto the situation that has brought me here. About a month ago, a local filmmaker released a cautionary documentary about financial and emotional abuse. One of the key case studies in the film was Jake. Now, I obviously did not keep up with what Jake had been up to after our divorce, so I had no idea about why he was even in that documentary, but I watched it and I was horrified. The documentary talked about how he had manipulated several women financially and emotionally, engaged in shady business deals, and even conned people out of thousands of dollars. I knew that Jake was capable of being a huge douchebag and that he was capable of treating his partner wrong, but I never expected his actions to become a cautionary tale for an entire town. I had no idea that he'd gone to such extremes. The filmmaker didn't use his real name, but the details were so specific that anyone who knew Jake could tell it was him. As after the documentary came out, my phone started blowing up. Old friends and acquaintances sent me messages like, "Wow, you dodged a bullet, and I can't believe you went through that." That was the way I found out about the documentary in the first place. Don't get me wrong, I was glad that Jake's real personality was showcased like that, and that finally I was getting the sympathy I deserved a long time ago. But the biggest shock came when my parents reached out. The first way they reached out was over text. My mom sent me this long emotional text where she basically apologized for not believing me. She also asked me for a chance to make things right. Then there were the voicemails from my dad where he told me about how sorry he and my mom were for the way they treated me and how they wanted to reconnect. There were more things that they'd said, but essentially they sounded like they really regretted the way they treated me, and they sounded desperate to make things right with me again. I just don't know what to feel about this whole thing. I'd be lying if I said that they didn't get to me a little. They're my parents after all. I know that I'm to want to have them back in my life, but at the same time I can't forget how they treated me when I was at my lowest. I can never forget how they put me in danger just to satisfy their beliefs. Obviously, I haven't responded to any of their attempts to contact me. I can't bring myself to. Instead, I've mostly just sat with my phone in my hand, reading and rereading their messages and feeling a bunch of emotions that I can't quite place my finger on. Part of me feels like I'm justified in ignoring them. They abandoned me when I needed them most, and now they're only reaching out because they're ashamed of how wrong they were. But another part of me feels like I should give them a chance. After all, people can change, right? I've been losing sleep over this. Eric thinks I shouldn't feel bad about cutting them off, but it's not that simple for me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust them again, but I also feel like ignoring them completely might be too harsh. I've come so far since those dark days, and I don't want to let them drag me back into old wounds, but I also don't know if I'd regret not hearing them out. So Ida for not wanting my parents in my life after everything they did, or am I being too stubborn and holding on to the past? Update 1. Hi again, thanks to everyone who commented on my original post. Your perspectives really helped me think things through. Some of you asked questions I realized I didn't address, so I wanted to clear a few things up before diving into what's happened since first. A lot of you asked why I even considered responding to my parents in the first place. Honestly, it's complicated. I've spent years trying to heal from the abandonment and betrayal, but deep down, there's still this part of me that wants to believe that they could change. I guess I was also scared that if I ignored them completely, I'd regret it later. Another question that came up was about Jake and whether my parents knew how bad he was during the marriage. I told them bits and pieces back then, but they never took me seriously. They just assumed I was exaggerating or being dramatic. I only told them the details about Jake's behavior a few weeks before I had planned to run away from him. They didn't take me seriously then either, but I guess I wasn't in the right state of mind to really look into that. I just assumed that since they were my parents, they'd protect me regardless of whether they believed me or not. I was wrong, obviously, but after reading your advice, I decided I couldn't ignore the situation forever. I figured the only way I'd get any peace was to hear my parents out, so I reached out to them and agreed to meet at a neutral spot, a small cafe halfway between their town and mine. I thought they'd be truly sorry for how they treated me and we could have an honest conversation. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. When I met them, they seemed more interested in justifying their behavior than actually apologizing. My mom went on about how they just didn't know that Jake was that bad and how the documentary opened their eyes. My dad said they did what they thought was right at the time and acted like that should be enough to excuse everything. It felt like they were more sorry about being wrong than about the pain they caused me. At one point, my mom even hinted that I could have handled things differently and maybe they wouldn't have misunderstood the situation. That hurt a lot. After everything I went through, they still found way to blame me, even just a little. I realized then that they weren't really trying to make amends. They were just trying to make themselves feel better. I told them I didn't want to continue the conversation. I said that I was happy with my life as it was and that I wanted things to go back to how they'd been before they reached out, us living separate lives. They looked shocked and tried to argue, but I left before they could talk me into staying. It wasn't an easy decision, but I felt like it was the right one for me and my family. That should have been the end of it, but then they crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Last weekend, Sophie had a school play. It was something she'd been looking forward to for weeks, and Eric and I were so proud of how hard she worked on her part. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw my parents sitting in the audience. I never told them about the play, so they must have gotten the details from Eric's Facebook. Don't worry, we've updated our privacy settings now. They didn't just show up, they acted like they were part of our family. They introduced themselves to other parents as Sophie's grandparents. Sophie was confused and asked Eric who they were. It was such an uncomfortable moment. I had to pull my parents aside and tell them to leave. My mom started crying and said I was punishing them for their past mistakes. My dad said they were just trying to be there for me now, like that somehow justified them ignoring my boundaries. I didn't want to make a scene, especially with other parents and kids around, so I asked them to leave as calmly as I could. They didn't make it easy, and they kept trying to cause a scene, but I somehow managed to get them to calm down and leave. After they left, Eric and I were both furious. He's been incredibly supportive through all of this, but he feels like my parents are trying to force their way into our lives. In the worst possible way. He was already upset and mad at my parents for mistreating me in the first place and then for choosing to still not take accountability for their actions. He's also protective of Sophie and he's worried about how their behavior might confuse or upset her. He's also worried that they're going to take things too far and maybe start using Sophie to get to me. Obviously, I completely understand where he's coming from, so I sent my parents a firm text afterward telling them their actions were acceptable and that I needed space. I told them that if they continued to cross boundaries, I'd have no choice but to cut off contact completely. They haven't responded yet, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time. Part of me wonders if I'm being too harsh, but I also feel like I have every right to protect my family from this kind of chaos. I tried giving them a chance, and they proved that they were not ready to respect my boundaries or my life. Anyway, I'll keep you guys updated on what happens next. Thanks for reading, and I appreciate any advice you have moving forward. Update: I really didn't think I'd be back so soon, but here we are. Things have gone completely off the rails, and I'm at a loss. A couple of days ago, a family friend reached out to me. This person is someone I've stayed in touch with over the years, but who also keeps in contact with my parents. They called to let me know something. They thought I should hear. My parents had apparently tried to contact Jake. Yes, my abusive, controlling, manipulative ex-husband Jake. They tried to contact the same guy whose crimes and predatory behavior were featured in a documentary just a few months ago. According to my friend, my parents reached out to Jake to hear his side of the story about our divorce. I was stunned after all the apologizing they did, after claiming they believed me now and wanted to make things right. They still felt the need to validate everything by going directly to him. What makes things worse is that apparently Jake didn't respond to them directly, but apparently made some smug, backhanded remarks through mutual acquaintances about how I've always been difficult and quick to blame others. Hearing this felt like someone ripping open an old wound. I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought maybe my friend had misunderstood or had gotten bad information. I tried to give my parents the benefit of the doubt again and reached out to them to confirm. I called my mom and asked her if she and my dad had contacted Jake. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she started defending their decision. She said that they wanted to understand the full picture of what happened in my marriage. She even said something like, "We were wrong before, so we don't want to make that mistake again." I was floored. I was already upset that they'd broken several boundaries while trying to make up to me, but finding out that my parents still did not trust anything that happened to me, even with video evidence of Jake's behavior, made me feel like I really did not matter at all to them. My dad chimed in during the call and doubled down. He said that Jake's behavior in the documentary was concerning, but that it didn't necessarily mean he had been a bad husband. They also insinuated that I might have been exaggerating my struggles back then and that they just wanted clarity. Their complete lack of remorse was like a slap in the face. I asked them if they had any idea how much pain this caused me and how much courage it took for me to even leave Jake in the first place. My mom brushed it off and said that I was being too emotional and that they didn't mean to hurt me in any way. My dad claimed that they were just trying to make informed decisions about rebuilding their relationship with me. At that point, I lost it. I told them that they were selfish, manipulative, and incapable of change. I said they had no place in my life or my family if they couldn't even acknowledge how deeply hurtful their actions were. They didn't even apologize. My mom just sighed like one was being difficult, and my dad muttered Something about how they can't ever win. With me, I hung up on them after and I felt so overwhelmed with emotions. I was sad and angry at the way my parents were treating me after years of no communication. I can't believe I gave them another chance just for them to betray me all over again, but I was also relieved. I was actually glad that I wouldn't have to interact with them anymore. As horrible as it was, this actually did bring me some closure. I always worried about how my parents and I stopped communicating on bad terms, and somewhere in me I always blame myself for that, but now I can clearly see that I wasn't at fault at all. I talked to Eric about it, and he's been my rock through all of this. He was furious too, especially since my parents' actions directly impacted the stability of our family. Sophie doesn't deserve to be dragged into this, and neither does Eric. We agreed that I needed to protect our family from my parents' chaos, so I've blocked my parents on everything: phone, email, social media. I told the family friend who warned me what happened, and they were completely supportive of my decision to cut contact. They even apologized for being the one to break the news, but honestly, I'm grateful they did. I needed to. No, I will admit that it hurts to realize that my parents will likely never be the people I need them to be, but I also know I can't keep putting myself in situations where I'm hurt over and over again. My focus is on my family, Eric, Sophie, and the life we've built together. They're my real family, and I won't let anyone ruin that. Thanks again for all your advice and support. It's been a tough road, but I'm learning to stand up for myself and prioritize the people who truly matter. Update 3. Hi again. This will hopefully be my last update. After everything that's happened, I've decided it's time to put a final stop to my parents' interference in my life. Things escalated in a way I never imagined, and I've had to make some tough decisions for the sake of my family. A couple of weeks ago, I got a call from Sophie's school. The principal wanted to let me know about an odd situation involving my parents. Apparently, they had reached out to the school directly and claimed that they were Sophie's grandparents. They apparently wanted to volunteer for an upcoming school event. They said it was their way of bonding with their granddaughter and insisted they had my permission. Thankfully, the school was suspicious enough to contact me first instead of just accepting their offer. I was horrified. I was pretty clear when I told them that I wanted nothing to do with them, but the fact that they chose to ignore everything I had to say and go straight for my family made me see red. They knew that I did not appreciate the fact that they showed up to Sophie's play without notice, and they knew that I wanted them to stay away from her. The fact that they crossed this line made it clear that they weren't going to stop unless I took serious action. Eric was equally furious. He said that he felt like they were trying to undermine us as parents and force their way into Sophie's life without our consent. That was the breaking point for me. I realized my parents were never going to respect boundaries or take no for an answer. They had already shown a complete disregard for my feelings and safety, and now they were involving Sophie in their mess. It was time to protect my family in a way I hadn't before. Eric and I decided to consult a lawyer about filing a restraining order. The process was emotionally draining, to say the least. I had to recount everything from their abandonment after my divorce to their recent behavior, including trying to contact Jake and showing up at Sophie's school play. The lawyer assured us we had a strong case and helped us file the paperwork. When my parents were served, their reaction was predictable. My mom left me a rambling voicemail where she was just crying about how I was tearing the family apart and accusing me of overreacting. My dad, on the other hand, sent an email from a new address since I blocked his old one, accusing me of being cold-hearted and saying I was poisoned by Eric's influence. Both of them also kept hinting that I was too dumb to know what I was doing, and that I was going to regret what I was doing to them all I could. Here was the fact that they still couldn't take accountability for their actions and instead chose to double down on blaming me. They tried to contest the order as well, and they did their best to disprove every evidence I had of their treatment of me and my family. Unfortunately for them, I had a mountain of evidence against them, and that wasn't even with me trying to collect evidence. They had treated me so badly for years that even the judge saw it and granted the restraining order. The order includes provisions that prevent them from contacting me, Eric, or Sophie in any way, including through third parties. If they violate it, they'll face legal consequences. To make sure we're fully protected, I've taken additional steps. I told everyone in my life, friends and family, that if anyone tries to reach out to me on my parents' behalf, I'll cut them off immediately. Thankfully, no one has tested this boundary so far, and most people have been incredibly supportive since the restraining order was put in place. My parents have tried to contact me a few times through indirect means. They sent letters to my old address, which were forwarded to me by my mail service, but I haven't opened them. I'm keeping them as evidence in case I need to prove they're still. This whole ordeal has been exhausting both emotionally and physically. There's a part of me that feels sad about how things turned out. I wish my parents could have changed, but I've come to accept that they are who they are, and I can't keep sacrificing my peace and happiness, hoping they'll become better people. Eric and I have decided to focus on moving forward. We're considering taking a family trip with Sophie to get a change of scenery and create some positive memories together. I'm also seeing a therapist to work through the lingering guilt and hurt from everything that's happened with my parents. If I'm being honest, I finally feel like this entire chapter of my life has come to an end. I've done everything I can to protect myself and my family, and I've set boundaries that I intend to enforce. My parents had plenty of chances to rebuild our relationship, and they blew every single one of them. Thank you to everyone who has supported me through this mess. Your advice and encouragement have meant the world to me, and I truly appreciate it.